Welcome to this little tutorial for the home group lesson on generosity. This is the last topic in this little practices sermon series we've been doing. And these two sermons are on the idea of actually adopting habits, spiritual disciplines, practices around the value of generosity, to train our hearts and to train our pocketbooks to be generous. Now, I want to kind of talk about one issue in the questions themselves and then highlight and help you maybe anticipate how your group or some people in your group might react to this topic. First, let me talk about the actual questions themselves. Looking over the questions from the two sermons, Lamar's last Sunday on the 8th and then mine coming up on Sunday the 15th, both on generosity. I really think the questions are pretty straightforward. I hope you'll have some good discussion around them. They're not just fill in the blank type answers, but they're pretty straightforward except for the very last question. The third question on the sermon from the 15th is so short it may have left out too much to help you do a good job on that question. That's the question that reads, the early church also took offerings, but they were for the relief of the poor among them. What would have to change at Lake Valley for us to take this teaching seriously as individuals and as a church family? How will that happen? Let me say a little more about that. I think that was probably too shortened up to make a lot of sense. The background is that in the time of the New Testament and going forward, the early church, they did take offerings every Sunday. Giving money, being generous, was a part of their worship together, just like it is for us. It wasn't always cash. A lot of poor people, sometimes people brought food. Sometimes they brought items like clothing to donate. But the background behind that question is that in the early church and for several centuries, as the church grew across the Roman Empire, the offerings were 80 or 90% for the poor. They would take the cash or they would take the food that was donated or they'd take the clothes that were donated. And then the deacons, elders, leaders, men and women of the church would then distribute that cash, food, clothing to people who needed it. They would prioritize the people who were poor within the church, but they also would take care of their pagan, unbelieving neighbors who were poor. And as that happened across the Roman Empire, we know from history and from outside written sources that one of the things that really fueled the Christian movement and really led to lots of conversions by Romans, pagans, they were just amazed and they were impressed and they wanted to know more about the faith behind people who would use their money that way, who would donate of their own free will and take care of not only of their own poor, but would take care of their poor neighbors who weren't Christians. And in fact, might have participated in mocking them or even persecuting them, and yet the Christians would turn around and take care of the poor. So that's the background, is that one of the keys to the expansion of Christianity in the early centuries as it spread across the Roman Empire in a pretty hostile environment was the generosity of the early Christians, the way they would take care of the poor both within the church and then with their neighbors as well. Well, the situation is different today, and it's different around the world. Anywhere our styles of worship have taken root, which involves a building and a staff and a preacher and a microphone and a sound system and chairs and a big room where people can gather, not just in a home, but in a rented or a dedicated building like at Lake Valley. Well, what's happened now is in most churches, a typical number is around 75 to 80% of the offering goes to run the church, pay the mortgage, keep the lights turned on, pay the staff salaries, buy the copier paper, buy the books for the children's ministry, on and on and on. So what's happened, and I'm not saying that it's evil, but I want you to understand what's behind the question. In the early days of Christianity, most of the money, 75, 80, 90% of the money given went to the relief of the poor. Some was used, we know from the New Testament, to maybe pay a stipend, a small portion of the income for leaders, elders, shepherds who paid attention to teaching. But the bulk of the money went to help the poor both within and without the church. Nowadays, in a modern American church, percentages are the other way around. Lake Valley, we probably give 15 to 20% of our budget, which is a substantial number, to relief of the poor, to missions, planting of churches, leadership development, programs in Garland County that help the poor. So that's a significant number, 15 to 20%, but it's a reverse number from the early days of Christianity. Well, that's where we are, and to do church the way we do church, that's what it takes. What we want on this particular question, we just want your group, though, to think about. It's almost like a thought experiment. What would it take for us to move towards that New Testament early church example? What would have to change about our expectations of how a church runs, what programs it offers, how many buildings it has? I'm not saying we should get rid of those things. Probably in modern America, you need some of those things. But we would like your group just to think out loud a little bit. Gosh, how could we take to heart the example of the New Testament, the early church, the early Christians, and realize that the offering given back to God from gratefulness as an act of worship was really primarily used for the relief of the poor. And what would that mean in modern America? Who would those poor be? What would we have to change about how we construct our budget at Lake Valley? What would have to change about our expectations of how we do church and what programs are offered, and on and on and on. Again, we're not driving for a particular question or answer. We're not proposing that we completely undo how we do church as Lake Valley, but we are wanting your group just to wrestle with this teaching of generosity. Should it matter how we spend our money out of the church budget, as well as should it matter how we spend our money out of our personal budgets? And from our personal budgets and from our church budget, how can we take this teaching seriously about generosity and move towards the New Testament example? So I think that's the only question that was a little unclear what we were really hoping for. I hope that will help you with that question. Probably be real open-ended. You might get a variety of responses, and this is the second thing I wanted to mention in this little tutorial. Every time this topic comes up, at least I can't say every time, most of the time that I'm in a conversation, whether personal or in a group, like a study, where issues around money, giving, the poor, stewardship, you get a lot of what I call the yeah buts. And here's what I mean by that. The yeah buts are this. Someone quotes Jesus saying it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom. Or someone quotes the Apostle Paul, that the love of money is the root of all evil. Well, what often happens in those conversations in a group when it happens is very quickly, it doesn't take even a minute usually, for someone to say, yeah, but. That's the yeah buts, the yeah buts. Yeah, but we have to live in the modern world. Yeah, but we need whatever, income, insurance, savings, retirement, whatever it is. And those observations are welcome, and they should be considered and discussed and talked about. Here's what I don't like about the yeah buts is when they happen so quick, and they usually come up very quick, see if they do in your group. It leads to not spending time feeling the weight of the biblical teaching. It's true we don't live in the first century. We live in the 21st. It's true our economy is a different kind of economy than the economy of Jesus and the apostles. It's true that we have modern inventions or economic systems around capital and around loans and banks, around interest, around insurance, that they either didn't have or they had kind of primitive versions of them. All that's true. So we can't just all put on robes and sandals and not drive our cars and walk everywhere and become first century peasants. That's not the point. The point, though, is to let the seriousness of these principles and teachings around generosity and money have some weight in your group. Don't let people too quickly dismiss them with the yeah buts. The solution is not a either or, either become a first century peasant or just dismiss all of the teaching. The solution is let the teaching have weight. Jesus and the apostles were very serious in their teachings about money. And their teachings about money almost always challenge us Americans because we have a lot of assumptions about money that don't line up with Jesus and his apostles. We need to let their teaching challenge us, where necessary, call us to repentance, where necessary, change our minds. Some of the teachings from the New Testament line up very well with American ideas about money, but some, maybe even many, do not. All we're asking your group to do is take these teachings seriously. It's just a tragedy. I started to say it's funny. It's not funny. It's a tragedy when I see people who are Christians, who claim to be followers of Jesus, too quickly dismiss his teachings or his apostles' teachings on money as being too idealistic. Oh, it's too spiritual, too blue sky. I have to live in the real world. These guys did too. They needed money. They had money. They had people that supported them. They had to buy food. They had clothing. It's not like they lived in some kind of hyper-spiritual vacuum where there was no need for money. So what we want to do as a church is take seriously this challenge to our hearts around generosity and around a lot of our attitudes about money. So just to equip you a little bit as you anticipate this discussion on generosity, I don't think it's going to be controversial. I don't think there'll be people that are mad or angry. But don't let your group too quickly dismiss with the yeah buts the teaching. Even when the teaching makes us uncomfortable or kind of challenges some of our cherished American ideas, help your group sit with the question. You say, you know what? Before we talk about insurance in modern America and all that, let's just think again about this question that we were asked. What is Jesus saying here? Help your group just stay with it for a little while. And then, man, for sure, talk about implications for modern living. Just don't let them dismiss it too. I see too many Christians dismissing Jesus' teachings as not realistic enough. I think the opposite is true. His teachings are intensely realistic about this important topic of generosity, stewardship, money, the love of money, how it affects our heart, both for the good and for the bad. So I hope that you'll have a great discussion around these issues. I hope the sermons will help provoke some thought from your people. Again, remember the main point. The main point of all these sermons has been we want to move towards some actual habits, practices that we adopt as a church family. And we want some of those practices to be in this area of generosity. So the ultimate question is going to be later this year, as a church family, what are we going to do, family by family or person by person? What are we going to do as a practice, as a habit, to help us retrain our minds and train our hearts to line up with Jesus and his way of life, and particularly in this case, his teaching and his way of life around generosity and around money and how we use it and how we shouldn't use it. So what will those practices look like, and what kind of habits will we adopt? That's where we're ultimately going. So if you can help your group just process these ideas, talk about them, let the teaching sink in, be a little sharp, that's what we're looking for this time. Other than that, I hope these two sets of questions are pretty straightforward and that you have a great discussion. If something about this has either confused you or concerned you, for sure get in touch with myself, Lamar, Morgan, and let us help you get ready for your home group or for your small group discussion. Thanks very much.